a heavy focus in the US. So we're currently rolling out like a 10,000 store network over there, which if that company was in Australia, it would, it'd be about 1,200 stores bigger than the whole industry.
Wow.
So the market for what we do in the US is just unbelievably huge. We're speaking to other customers that, combined would have about 30,000 locations spread all across America. And they're the kinds of businesses that really can, leverage our technology to really great effect, because they're really struggling with, the visibility piece, and like steering such a big company, but then also engaging with the millions of people that they have like moving through their stores, every day.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 148 of the Startup Playbook podcast. I'm your host Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors and subject matter experts on how they got started, strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. I'm delighted to have Matt Elsley, the co-founder and CEO of Qsic, as my guest for this episode. Qsic leverages smart devices and other inputs such as music to help drive real-time changes in consumer behaviour, such as increasing customer spend inside retail stores. They've had a fascinating journey since launching in 2012, initially as a bootstrapped company for the first few years before going on to arrange an angel round of funding from their first few customers. Qsic is now available in over 2,500 retail stores, including 7-Eleven and McDonalds in the US, and this week announced their Series A funding round of $4 million led by Carthona Capital. In this interview, we covered a wide range of topics, including Matt and his co-founder's decision to shut down their first business to go all in on Qsic, their journey from being a bootstrap to a VC-funded startup, how to sell to tier 1 enterprises such as 7-Eleven and McDonald's in the US, how COVID helped Matt and his team to reassess and refocus their business, how to get the most out of your advisors and investors, and much more. Without further ado, here is my interview with Matt Elsley. Hi Matt, welcome to the Startup Playbook podcast, and thanks so much for, first of all, bringing lunch, which is amazing.
No problem.
But thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Rohit.
So Matt, for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, Nick and I, we started working together probably back in like the late 2000s. We started our first company together called Easy Control. We were doing home automation for these just really large homes, high-end homes all throughout Melbourne, and connecting all the subsystems of these homes, so lighting, security, audio, visual, and just allowing them to control everything from their iPad. So as we were sort of going through that journey, we found that we were really great at doing large multi-zone sound systems. So we started attracting a lot of music sort of fans that would just give us these huge CD collections and like, yeah, I want to do this, but everywhere in my home. Then that, like, you probably remember like ripping CDs to hard drives. That like it would take an hour for a CD.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah, and like if you've got to do like 400 plus, like you were doing that for weeks. And it was just cutting all the fat out of the deals, and we're like, oh, this is a nightmare. We don't want to be doing this. So we went looking for options around how do we not do that. And so streaming was really in its infancy. It didn't exist in Australia at the time. We found Rhapsody over in the US, which was the biggest one. And we were like, great, there's no ripping CDs. Like we can just, patch it into homes in Australia and, off we go. And it was that sort of moment where you would give someone that control in their house and go, yeah, see that? You just search for whatever you want and hit play and you can push it any room in your house. And they were just like amazed, like, but no, where is it? Like I need to know. And you're like, well, it's coming from the internet and, don't worry, you're paying for it. It's fine. But don't get caught up in about ownership. It's, you can use it whenever you want. So isn't that the main point? And so that we were doing that for years, really, and we just saw streaming coming, and we were working with it for a really long time. And then we sort of graduated doing like larger jobs and then commercial jobs. And we were introduced to music licensing for businesses, which, was like the services that we were using from the US, like aren't commercially licensed. So we were like, okay, so let's just find a streaming service that is, and couldn't find one. They just didn't exist at the time, back in sort of like 2009. And so then we were like, well, let's let's naively, two young guys, we were like, well, let's just build it. Like that shouldn't be too hard. And
famous last words.
Oh, completely. And doing all the things that you would expect like a first time founder to do, like completely over engineering and overthinking everything without having any impact with customers. You know, it took us a long time to figure out the licensing, like all the licensing to run like a streaming service into businesses in Australia that were actually written for Qsic, like in conjunction with like Nick and I, which just took an incredibly long time. But once we got there, we found that, you know, that's all we just sort of wanted to do. So we really like shut down Easy Control and then we started Qsic. But I guess the way that we were looking at it, we weren't just about providing like a background music service. You know, we really wanted to do what we did in homes. Like we wanted to create these experiences that were highly automated, very contextual, but we use audio like as our baseline to do that. Because like the most successful implementations that we ever did from a home automation space was when, you know, people didn't really need to control anything. You know, they'd be walking around their house, and these are really big homes, so, you know, lights would be turning on and off just as they're using them. You know, we'd be shutting down, you know, like the air conditioning in parts of the home that they're just not in, you know, and having the home adapt around how they're using it. And we were like, well, businesses have the most to gain from this kind of contextual experience driven, you know, platform, which is, you know, what Qsic was really all about. So we started in a different place, and, you know, we do compete against background music services, you know, but today we really are an intelligent platform for really automating infrastructure, but then automating content and music as well, and for, you know, for experience.
Yeah, very cool. And obviously a fascinating story, and we're going to dive in deep into multiple areas with this. But just one thing that I wanted to pick on that you mentioned was the decision to sort of shut down Easy Control and go all in on Qsic as well. First of all, was that a difficult decision to make? You know, obviously it sounds like you sort of really recognize the opportunity and kind of recognize that no one else is really doing that. But I also, at like what stage of Qsic did you sort of make that decision as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like Easy Control just taught us a lot of lessons. You know, it's incredibly difficult to build a business when you're the product. Like if it's not like we were buying a lot of different services and we were just kind of installing it, and, you know, we were roughing cable in and like programming everything and getting everything to work. And if we weren't doing that, the business just wasn't earning any money. So it's incredibly difficult to do that kind of work, line up your next job, you know, just do everything you need to do to make that work. And then once it's installed, people almost assume or expect that, you know, well, I've paid you just to install it once, so you should really support it in perpetuity, which is just, you know, it's a terrible business model essentially. So what that taught us was that when we had, you know, Qsic up and flying and it was sort of growing well, we were just like, well, let's not do that, but let's not repeat the same mistakes. So, you know, recurring revenue was like a must, you know, so everything was subscription based. You know, we wanted to try to unlock ourselves from the platform so it would stand on its own 2 feet really quickly. And so that meant automating, you know, and getting customers to see the value in, like, if we had to service anything, you know, that there was a cost attached to that. But that's about training your customers as much as yourselves. And all these amazing lessons that running a business when you don't know, you know, you just don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And just folding all those learnings into, you know, something more meaningful. But I'm glad that we made all those mistakes with Easy Control than Qsic.
You mentioned, you know, customers being at kind of the center and having to train those customers as well. And I think it's really interesting that you sort of transitioned from doing this in kind of high-end homes to, you know, obviously more of a B2B focus with Qsic as well. What did that process look like in terms of taking this out to market? As you mentioned, you know, the world was very different back then. Streaming itself wasn't as kind of well known. Was that a challenging part, or like how did you go about getting your first few customers through the door?
Look, it was extremely challenging, you know, because in theory it sounds really great. Oh, of course you just stream into businesses. But then you know, we started really with hospitality because it was at the time I was working in point of sale in computer networking for like the hospitality industry. So I knew a lot of people in that industry. I'm like, look, I think we can get a foothold with this, and you know, these guys, they'd be willing to pay for it. Their businesses are experience driven. You know, all these things overlap. Like, it should be good. You know, but it was incredibly difficult because you go into these places and you go to install it and realize, you know, you're trying to pump an F1 car down a dirt track. Like, the internet just didn't work. Like, or it was, you know, it was dial up, or it was just, you know, like the broadband sort of coming in was just an amazing wave for us. But the thing that we found, that I think Spotify just entered the market at the time. Pandora had been in for about a year at that point. And what these, like, we had a lot of people talk to us like, oh, like Spotify and Pandora, they're just going to crush you and they're going to do what you do. And what they actually did was educate the market for us, so people knew what streaming was. Like, because when we were talking about it from home automation days, people were like, streaming, like, I don't know what you're talking about. So the market knew what we were trying to do, but it was those early adopters that really leaned in. It was like, yeah, that's a better way of doing it, and yeah, that's going to be efficient, so let's give that a go. And Australia, just in general, is an amazing petri dish for businesses or the B2B space to try new technologies. And I think from that angle, we were very lucky.
I think very quickly off the back of that, you guys did a trial at Terminus Hotel. What did that first meeting look like?
Well, like, you know, it was in one of Andy's buildings on Church Street, like where their office is. And they were gutting the building at the time, actually. So we went in, opened the door, and there's just joists everywhere. Like, there's no floorboard. So we were stepping across beams, you know, and he had this couch sort of slung across, you know, two beams and facing each other. And there was a big hole in between us. It was one of the weirdest meetings like ever. But, you know, when you meet with people that you just click with. You know, Andy, you know, is an incredibly creative and deep thinker. And because his businesses, the Sandhill Road Boys, one of 5 now, their business is extremely experience driven, you know, apart from the food offering and the drink offering and the service itself. Like, the actual physical space and the environment and experience is like paramount to them, their venues being successful, and to which they're the masters of. So when you're talking about an experience driven platform, and you're just lucky enough to meet someone like Andy who just gets it, I don't think we realized at the time how lucky we were to sort of, the first call that we make is to someone who fundamentally has spent his career, you know, thinking about the problem we're trying to solve. And from that angle, it was, you know, just super lucky. But Andy has been an amazing supporter of ours for, you know, for many, many years. Like you said, sat on our board, and he's always he's always the guy that when you're down and out, you call Andy. He's always the one that sort of makes things just a little bit brighter.
That's amazing, and that's awesome to have people like that in your corner. And it's, you know, not often that you get customers that are those types of people for you as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we called Andy because he already was a customer. You know, so we'd already been supporting, I think, 3 of their venues, and we were rolling out across the rest of them. But when we were looking at funding Qsic, like, Andy was one of the first people we called. Yeah, and it really went from there.
Yeah. And the story that Andy was telling me as well was, I think that you had initially planned to raise 500K, and he came back and said, you know, what could you do with $1 million? Yeah,
I remember that really well, because we were having that in the Orica building just up the road here. Andrew Lark, our chairman, who became our chairman, was in his office actually, and it was the Sandhill Road boys and Andrew Lark, and you know, we were just discussing, you know, what Qsic was about and what we wanted to achieve. Yeah, and then the general consensus from the group was, you're going to need more than 500, you know, to do what you're trying to do. And I look back on it now and I was just like, that was so incredibly right, you know. But that just comes from like experience, I think, and probably naivety on Nick and I's part, thinking that, you know, you're going to be able to scale yourself to a level that is just impossible. Like, you need more people to help you grow a business like this.
Yeah. Well, Like in terms of that, you know, I understand that you were sort of bootstrapped for the first 2.5 years of the business before you went and took this angel investment round. I guess what changed for you from bootstrapping to having that initial round of funding?
Other than maxing out every card I had and like being in a huge amount of debt and like saying to Nick, I can't afford to keep going, you know, and Nick being in the complete same space. Then we did probably what every founder does, and you know, you go to family and friends, and then we were like, now what? You know, and we knew that we couldn't fund it ourselves. We couldn't raise enough capital from everyone we knew. And so we went to the next best thing, which was our customers. And we were just like super open and honest about, this is where we're at, this is how we're growing, this is the pace that we're growing at, and these are our focuses. You know, do you want to come on this ride with us? And that, you know, that was really, it was really just, we were just in so much debt. You know, when you're young and start something new, you think, yeah, we're going to be able to do everything on our own. And then you realize you can't, you need help. Yeah. So that was it.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, I think that that's a very common experience that a lot of founders go through. And again, not really something that's kind of often spoken about. We speak a lot about fundraising. We speak a lot about hiring. We don't kind of talk about what happened in the journey to get to that point. And, you know, I've spoken to many founders who have been in very similar boats in terms of like maxing out their credit cards and all of those sort of things as well. And I understand both you and Nick had pretty young families at that time as well. Again, can you kind of like share a little bit about what that sort of first 2.5 years of Qsic was like in, you know, not really paying yourself, I imagine, and all of those sort of things, and having to take care of your family as well?
Yeah, like, look, incredibly difficult, because I already had a son, my eldest son, and then like I left my old role and started working with Nick, and then started Easy Control and sort of started Qsic, and then 2 weeks after that, like I found that we were pregnant with our second son.
Wow.
So 2 kids, no wage. So it was really like 2.5 years from there, you know, that we were really just hand to mouth, and not really even that, to be honest. You know, we hired our first employee, you know, that every scrap of, you know, money that we got in the door was just really going to his salary, you know, and that's the way that it was until we were really about 5 people. And then we were just like, look, it's unsustainable for us to just not pay ourselves. We've got the most understanding wives, I think, on the planet, and our families, you know, both of our extended families. I can't begin to imagine what it'd be like for, you know, her parents, you know, watching her husband go off and do something that no one's really quite sure what we are doing or why we're doing it or to what effect, because we were terrible at articulating it at the time. And they would just like let it run its course. I'd let him go. But I look back on what I asked of my wife, or what Nick asked of Polly, his wife. It was huge, really. But for us, it never felt risky, because, like, you know, because we never thought we were going to fail. Like, it just in our bones, or in my bones, I was like, this is going to work. This is what businesses need. And then from that angle, it was never risky. So I never thought about it, because I'm like, this is going to work. Like, this is short-term pain for long-term gain. Like, don't worry about it. I look back on it now with a wiser head, and I'm like, that was just such a big ask, you know, but, you know, youth, right?
No, exactly. And like, I don't think that I've ever spoken about this on the podcast, but, you know, I'm assuming that everyone has to go through similar journeys when they sort of decide to quit and all of those sort of things. And I think one thing that doesn't often get spoken about is the partners, the families that, you know, like you said, you have full conviction that this is going to work, but your family members may not have that same belief or all of those sort of things. And they don't necessarily get to choose whether they come along or not. As is probably similar for your kind of early team members or people that kind of support you at the early stages too, especially when maybe things aren't going to plan, or they think that, you know, in 6 months things will sort of turn around, and 6 months goes by and we're kind of in very similar positions. Is there anything that you use to share the conviction that you and Nick had for the business with those people around you? Is there anything that you use to kind of help others to work past or get through those difficult moments?
As a tool, like it's hard to pinpoint, but I think like just the enthusiasm and the passion for doing what you're doing. I think if you really have that, I think that really radiates. And the people that come and work in startups are really, they're attracted to that. I think they want to work on things that are meaningful. You know, they want to like jump out of bed, not particularly knowing what the whole day is going to hold for them. You know, there's a special kind of person that wants that challenge. And look, it's not for everyone. Like the hours are terrible. You know, that you either want that experience that it's sort of like every day is a new adventure, and we're going to solve, you know, real problems like together and really quickly, and we're not going to get them all right. But as long as we're not making those same mistakes over and over, then we're going to get through. Like things that we talk about a lot, like at Qsic, is clearing the hurdle right in front of us. Like, and that doesn't mean that we're not looking at the hurdle five hurdles down, but we're really conscious of the one right in front of us. You know, because you can't afford to keep hitting hurdles. You've got to clear them. And that, you know, it's about focus. You know, things that we've talked about a lot, particularly over the last sort of 6 months, is leadership. You know, what is the difference? You know, what is the difference between leadership and management? And, you know, we have a really great leadership team at Qsic. And then like how are we empowering our staff to be really proactive and use their initiative and tap into the brain's trust throughout the whole business. And that's not something that's easy. You know, you give authority to people, and even though a lot of people want it, then it's sometimes not natural for them to use it or wield it. And, you know, trusting them to make those calls, knowing that they're going to get some of those calls wrong. And even when you think that you know, as a founder, like, because you've worked every role in the business, you know every role really intricately, especially when you're in our size, about 30 people. You know, it's hard sometimes to let that go, but you need to, if you're going to really flourish and, you know, grow across markets, you know, across territories. You know, it's, you know, you've got to make that leap.
Yeah. Well, what did that process look like for you and Nick? Because I imagine that for a really long time it was just the two of you, and then, you know, as you mentioned, up to about sort of 30 team members now. Yeah, what did that process look like in terms of bringing the first few hires on board, and what was it that you were looking for?
Yeah, so the first hire was our CTO. So yeah, all technical essentially, because Nick and I are non-technical, I guess. Like, we understand fundamentally like everything that we are doing, you know, but we need people to help us, you know, realize and build the actual platform itself. So always engineering heavy. We were sales and support, and, you know, everything from accounting to cleaning. You know, we were everything else other than engineering. But then over time, you know, you grow, you know, you become more specialized in particular areas, you know, and, you know, you start hiring people that are just way better at these particular aspects than you are, you know, which is amazing.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Andy mentioned is that's been incredible for him to see the journey since he's kind of invested in, and since he was an early adopter of the businesses, has been your ability to just attract really top-class talent to come and join Qsic as well. You know, it's something that we often hear a lot from startups is, you know, you need to have the best team and you need to hire the best people. It can be really difficult for early stage companies to try and convince really incredible people who have multiple options on the table to come and leave what they're doing to, you know, probably earn a lot less working at a startup as well. What does that sort of look like for you in terms of trying to attract the best people to come and work at Qsic?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that the kind of platform that we're building, you know, this is largely a greenfield opportunity. You know, there isn't really a yardstick for what we're building. You know, there is a direction, you know, but we don't even know everything, you know, that we're going to need to do in the future. We know what we're doing today and what we're going to be doing tomorrow, you know, but where it can ultimately lead, we think that the technology around experience and being able to, you know, automate and adapt and do it in a really contextual and data-driven way for businesses that have bricks and mortar stores. That's a technology that once you understand how to do that, it's going to have a lot of applications well outside of, of businesses. That'll have applications in any kind of environment. And that's the sort of thing that's incredibly exciting to us. But when you're talking to like really, really intelligent and ambitious developers, and you're painting them a picture of, this incredible sandpit that you can not just come into, but you can actually have a really meaningful part of how that actually develops, that'll resonate with the kinds of people that we want. And that's like we heavily index in the hiring process for attitude. You can't really teach someone a great attitude. You can teach them work ethic, we can work on your skill set, but attitude, like that is something, someone who is exhibiting like our core values is someone that we really want to grab hold of.
So in terms of exhibiting core values, Andy, in my conversation with him, was full of stories. And one of the stories that he mentioned is that you guys used to have a van that you would sort of drive to Sydney for a meeting and like work on the way over there and back, which is obviously incredible hustle. He also told me about a haunted house that you guys worked out of. What's the story behind that?
In that same building that we first had that meeting with Andy, they did it up and put their own office in there. And when it's a huge building, and when they had finished doing it up, we were like, well, we're looking for office space. Do you reckon we could grab, the back half of the top floor? And they're like, yeah, but it hasn't been renovated. And we're like, look, it doesn't matter. We don't care. Like, we just need rooms. So we went in there, and like I was working really late one night, and I was hearing this bouncing tennis ball, and I was just like, what is that? And there was a lane out the back. I'm like, oh, some kids probably, it was 11 o'clock at night, but I was thinking, oh, someone's playing tennis out the back. And I could hear this tennis ball, and it was coming from like the hallway underneath me, because like where my office was. I'm like, this is weird. And like 11 o'clock at night, no one's there. So I went down, and like I was like looking down the hallway. I just got this chill up the back of my neck, and I was like, that's it, I'm going home. And I thought nothing of it until I was round at Andy's place probably about 6 or 8 months later, and I don't know why it came up, but it did. And I was like, oh, like I've heard this tennis ball bouncing in the office when I was really late at night. And Andy's wife like just froze, like Jackie. And I was like, what's happening here? What have I said? And Jackie was like, oh, like years ago, her grandfather owned that building. I was like, oh wow, that's an amazing connection. And then she's like, yeah, but the stories were that they used to play cricket down the hallway, with a tennis ball in like exactly where you're saying. And I was like, are you saying like I've met your grandpa? Like it was, she was just like, they used to play cricket down there. That is the freakiest story ever.
Wow.
But needless to say, I didn't work late nights a lot in the office after that.
Yeah, and I've heard they've got a beautiful office out in. You're based in Fitzroy?
We're in Abbotsford, just
Abbotsford.
On the river. Yeah, so it's like being in the country, but right on the city doorstep. So it's great.
Amazing. Speaking of country, coming back to what Andy had mentioned about Nick, I think that we were speaking about this before we kind of turned on the mic, and thank you once again for lunch as well. But we were chatting over lunch, and I think one of the things that we're speaking about is the importance of having co-founders and how you can sort of really lean on them. And from what I understand, you and Nick actually went to primary school together?
Senior school. Yeah. So we were schoolmates. Then like after school, I went overseas for a while. Like sort of came back, and he went overseas when I came back. And then when he arrived back in Melbourne, we just caught up randomly at a mutual friend's birthday, and he was going on about how he learnt all this like automation stuff, about how he was working in the UK. And I was like, well, like I'm working in networking, so automation needs a really solid network to sit on. I was like, well, that's really interesting. Why don't we have a chat about it? about 3 weeks later, we had a company and we were just off and doing things.
That's amazing. And what has that journey been like for you with Qsic as well since then? So, I mean, we've spoken about you sort of going on to raise funds. You know, I think one of the things that's actually sort of really stood out to me as well is, you know, you've been around for a little while, but the company's still relatively new, but the caliber of companies that you have as customers, so companies like 7-Eleven and McDonald's in the US as well, just massive top tier, you know, clients that generally take years for startups to get on board. And I hear that you closed them from a meeting in the US as well. What was that like?
Yeah, well, that's always been one of the things I think from an investor's point of view that they've sort of been a little shocked with, that we have such aspirational companies or brands already as clients. It just goes to the nature of who we are as people. We've always been shoot the lights out kind of guys, like Nick and I. We've, you know, sort of, they're the customers that we want. Well, let's go and get them. Like, we're not going to build up to them, I guess. But as the Qsic platform really started evolving, when we started in hospitality and when we became really automated, you know, and then we became data driven, and then we're, you know, looking at other sensors that we can bring in to understand the environments better. You know, that kind of automation and intelligence like naturally pushes you up into the enterprise layer. And then when we were starting to talk to these businesses, like selling them on the whole journey of like, yes, this is the value exchange of what we do for you today, but like, this is where we're going and this is why we're going there. And these are businesses that are highly optimized already. You know, they're looking for every which way that they can innovate. You know, there's a reason why McDonald's has been at the forefront of its chosen industry for like 60 years. Is because they're continually evolving and developing and doing things differently. And so they're, you know, a lot of the time they can be coaching those margins, and they understand that those 1% gains replicated across such a large store network, what that actually means. You know, and we're a platform that allows for that kind of experimentation front of house, you know, that we can do it in a really data-driven and meaningful way, which resonates with, you know, all the major brands that we have, because they're like, yes, we go through an education piece with them about why we're going there, but once they understand it, they're like, well, of course we want that, you know, and that's really, you know, there's no magic in it. That's kind of how we do it. We just tell them where we're going and why.
I mean, you know, for a lot of founders, especially the ones that play in the B2B or in the enterprise space, as you mentioned, you know, sometimes there's this aspiration to work there, but oftentimes it's about a build up of getting there. You guys seem to have kind of jumped the gun in terms of just, as you said, just going for it, which is absolutely incredible. But do you have any advice in terms of if founders are looking to close sort of larger enterprise deals or go after those aspirational customers? What are the steps that you need to go through? There's often kind of talk about finding like an internal customer advocate. Is there anything that you use to help you through that process, and even just getting your foot in the door?
Well, getting your foot in the door can often just take hustle. You know, you've got to be prepared to explore every option, tap every shoulder, you know, do whatever you need to do, cold call, you know, just rock up at some instances at their offices. You need to just get in front of people. But then once you're there, you've got to have something really meaningful to say, and not meaningful to you, like meaningful to them, you know, and getting them talking about what are the problems that they're actually grappling with. Because like Qsic has many different flavors. Like what we do for one customer, you know, we don't do for all. We develop like a suite of features, you know, that's very different from what 7-Eleven use as to what McDonald's uses, and for what grocery you're going to use, and all these types of things. But they're all fundamentally using the same platform, but for very different purposes. But like one thing that we do far more than anything else is like listen. You know, like I think a lot of people do probably far too much talking in their pitches. Like most of the time we try to like seed some questions, you know, get, you know, either the head of technology or the head of marketing, whoever we actually might be talking to, get them talking about what their focuses are, you know, and what their goals are, what are their aspirations, what do they want to achieve, you know, when they're at the helm of whatever they're doing. And then it's about actually, you know, positioning your platform of like, how do I help you realize your goals? And then they take on the platform themselves. Like, yes, this is a vehicle for me to achieve what I need to, not, advanced Qsic scores.
How, just on that, you mentioned, you've got to have the hustle and you've got to do everything you can in multiple different ways, oftentimes to try and get your foot in the door. How, I guess, focused was that strategic approach with the type of companies that you were reaching out to? So was it, here's a particular industry or vertical that we want to go after and we'll just target a bunch of companies there, or was it specifically this particular company that we want to work with and let's just do whatever we can to get there?
Yeah, I remember having this chat with Nick, actually. It was really around, we don't have any flagship stores. We've got great customers, but we need flagship brands. And how do we go about achieving that? And we were like, okay, well, like from a quick service restaurant perspective, our technology lends itself really well to that. And we've done a few like smaller chains, and we were like, well, McDonald's is the biggest. Like, okay, well, let's work out a way of how do we actually get in there. And then we were like looking at like petrol and convenience, and we were like, look, it's that is a real, it's not a dissimilar industry. It has very fast moving customers. Dwell time is short. Your opportunity to grab and engage, you need really heightened skill set to be able to do that. And we're like, well, we can do that really well. So we were like, well, 7-Eleven is a company that's going through a real transformation at the time, and still to this day is, going through a real, they've got a really heavy digital push, and revamping their stores. And we were like, well, this is a brand that can actually really leverage what we're doing. So it's sort of trying to see the businesses that are doing things that you can really add and amplify that kind of value. But then also once you're in there, like probably many enterprise sales businesses, working out like who's your champion, who is the champion of the product, like who are the blockers. Generally those are, people in IT and, procurement. And these are like the last custodians of, they see it as their role to make sure the business doesn't make mistakes. But we've found like bringing in IT from not as an afterthought, like immediately, so when we go into those initial meetings, like, is IT engaged? Like, can we meet someone from there? And like just, developing your relationship so that you're covering, operations like IT, procurement, marketing, all these people are going to want very different things from you. I know that so many people talk about, oh, you've got to have one person to sell to. I've never met anyone who sells an enterprise platform that has one person they sell to. But it's a tapestry, and I guess everyone has their own stakeholders, like when they get through the door, but it's one as a sales team and as a business that we're constantly, assessing and evaluating and strategizing about, is everyone getting what they need from us? Because if they are, you'll eventually get the deal done.
Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier, your approach or what McDonald's needs may be very different to what a 7-Eleven needs. When you're going into these meetings, and I love the fact that you said, a lot of it is about listening to the customer as well, but how much of those meetings is about coming in there with a solid understanding of what it is that you want to pitch to them or what it is that you want to deliver for them versus more of a discovery to understand what their problems are?
I think it's a good mix of both. For one, you've got to get them talking first to actually understand what their focuses are and what they want to be doing, more importantly, why they want to be doing it. And then there is a lot of like thinking on the fly about how you are going to be positioning yourself to sit yourself like right in that sunlight. Like, so, you can easily show how you're going to advance that cause, so, and then from there, it's actually, selling, where this can go, what else you can help them achieve, and how you can do it in a way that actually doesn't require them to do any more work. Like, it's a very low touch platform. That's generally how we do it.
Yeah, interesting. One of the other things that you mentioned earlier was just the real thinking that you've put in, especially over the last sort of 6 to 12 months on the business. And I know through previous conversations as well, we've spoken about the opportunity that, everything that's happened with COVID last year in particular has given you in being able to take a step back and really sort of think about what type of product you're building, who you're building it for, and all of those sort of things. And it's something that a lot of other founders have also mentioned as well as one of the benefits to come out of that has been the kind of the ability to step back and think more strategically around things. I'm curious to know whether, like, having gone through that experience, has that shifted how you, or have you created any practices around you being able to do that on a more ongoing basis for the business?
Yeah, I think we have. Like, I think we've learnt that self-reflection is really important. I think that you do get caught up in, just running the business, and there's so much coming at you, like, all the time. Everyone's running, super quickly in all different directions, and that's really hard. Like, we talk about it as like feeding the beast. The company is a beast, and it will, take all time that you've actually got, whether or not you're focusing it in the right direction or not. And I think what COVID really taught us is when that was gone, when in the initial sort of phase of lockdown, where the whole country was sitting at home going, now what? That's like the first time in many, many years that Nick and I had the opportunity just to sit down and go, like, what are we building and why? And to what end? Like, where do we want to go? And like, we really had a fundamental, like, bottoms up, like, rethink of what we were doing and how we could fully leverage the assets that we've already got to a much higher value. And what we really came to is that we have this really intelligent automation layer. It's contextually driven, so we have amazing data sources coming out of these businesses. But now what? Like, what else can we do with it? And we really defined, like, this this experimentation layer that we can build across those assets that will run these tiny experiments, these micro A/B testing of, like, all the various settings, and then we can evaluate, we can test, measure, and learn, and, like, either create a higher value, like a higher BAU or of operation for the business, or fold that learning into further experimentation. And the end game is really to have that done in a really, data-driven and completely autonomous kind of way, where it's not our data scientists actually, designing those proof of concepts and those, those experiments, but, Qsic is recognizing those patterns and designing them themselves, and then, folding them into that more elevated business as usual. But that COVID did that, for us. And I think what it taught us is that we need to be doing far more self-assessment on an ongoing basis. That you do need time to unplug from what is actually happening, to look at it subjectively of, like, is this going in the right direction? And it's something that we work on from our leadership team as well. That we're all self-assessing, like, our departments, round tabling, making sure we're doing those long walks where we can talk about, like, everything and anything, and creating that, that definitely open and honest way of engaging with each other. Because that, if people are if they feel like they can be vulnerable about what they think and, what their concerns are, if you can create that, you get to a much more meaningful position so much quicker. And to, like, another core value of ours is invent solutions. That's about owning problems, but also, inventing solutions. And if you can get there in a really vulnerable way very quickly, you can invent some amazing solutions, but you've got to create that environment.
I think that's amazing kind of values and amazing sort of lessons that you've been able to take as well. One part of kind of touching on being vulnerable and kind of having that self-reflection piece is having people that are almost a step removed from you and the business and the day-to-day to be able to give you that kind of subjective advice as well. And I know someone who's close to the business is Matt Allen, who gave the intro. Also, Matt's been on the show a bunch of times as well, and he just seems to be across everything in general. But from what I understand, Matt initially came on as an advisor for the business as well. And, like, having worked with Matt and having known him for quite a few years, he's the type of person who has multiple different opportunities and multiple different companies that want his time and want his help and support. And one of the things that he mentioned about Qsic was that this was the one non-portfolio company that he leaned in on. And he said that he was just, again, very sort of blown away by what you guys were building and the traction that you're able to have and the hustle that you guys were able to develop as well. But again, just, I want to come and touch on what Matt's been able to add from a business perspective. But again, for a lot of founders, they want the right sort of advice and want the right type of advice for them, but it can often be hard to try and attract those type of people. Any advice for founders in how you get the right advisors for your business to come on board and be willing to share their time, energy and resources?
Yeah, and I think traditionally, like Nick and I have struggled with a lot of that. We got a call from Matt really out of the blue when he was working at Amazon, because he was like managing like part of the startup community. And I think he was just running down like the Amazon bill. It was like, these guys run a pretty heavy, large footprint. Maybe I should chat to them. So he invited us to some lunches and, just got to know him. And he just tended to be someone when I was really grappling with a problem and I wanted sort of some, fairly direct, just brutal, subjective advice I kept sort of turning to. And I introduced him to the board. I was like, look, I think Matt would add a lot of value from his just no nonsense cut through that he does. I think that he would be like an amazing advisor for us. And then the board met him, fell in love with him. So then, one of our board members was stepping off, so we invited Matt on. And very quickly, from day one that he joined the board, he kind of acted like our chairman anyway. Which is great. He just sort of, epitomised it really. And then we were like, look, I think we should make Matt our chairman, and he has been ever since for about 12 months now. Yeah, but in terms of like attracting that, it's really through like our advisors and the people that we lean on has really come from, just being out and, and meeting people. A lot of our advice does come from our investor network. We have a really wide ranging and high caliber, group of investors that have pretty much experience in every kind of industry that we could hope for, and that are very successful people in their own right, and very good strategic thinkers. And when you can lean on people like that challenge your thinking, and challenge your strategy, it's just worth its weight in gold, to be honest. I don't really have any advice about how to attract that, because for us it's just happened so naturally over such a long period of time. But I think for the early years, I think we struggled with like a lot of that ourselves.
Yeah, well, if I can reframe the question then, once you do have an advisor or have a board in place, how do you make the most out of those type of people?
Yeah, and like we've had a really formal structure from day one. Like we've had a board since we started. And that was just through, sound advice through, family and friends of like how you should be setting up businesses. And, so we had a board really early on. I was sitting on a board before I even really knew what they did. I think that over the years, I think initially early on, we used to treat it very much as a reporting structure. Our first chairman, Andrew Lark, is an amazing strategist and business mind, and he instilled in us like what numbers in business are important and what are not, and how you need to manage those numbers, to make them trend in the right direction. And like that's a skill that we have that I'll be forever grateful for. But now with our chairman Matt, we're taking that and we're expanding on it about like, okay, so how do we supercharge this growth, and how do we grow it across, the two different markets that we now find ourselves being, Australia and New Zealand and America. Yeah.
So speaking of supercharging your growth, congratulations on the recent announcement of your $4 million Series A funding round as well, led by Carthona. What was that process like in raising your Series A round?
Really different actually, because like we did it completely during COVID. It was completely virtual. Like we didn't really meet Dean and James until, after the deal was really done and things started thawing out and you could move around again. But initially we were going to raise in 2019 and we were so busy, look, let's just put that on hold. we started standing things back up again in 2020, but then March hit, and then the world caught fire with COVID, so we paused it again, and then we actually started getting some inbound interest actually, like through COVID, and we're like, look, if people are willing to chat, then maybe we should focus back on it, and there's not a lot else that we're doing right now, so let's focus on it. And so we did the the whistle stop tour, and it was completely virtual, like meeting people, and it can be really difficult to build rapport with people when it's being done virtually, especially when we were raising on industries that were like largely shut down at the time. With Dean and James, we found that we just had like a real affinity with them very, very quickly. They understood what we were doing like almost immediately. They scheduled meetings with us, very, very quickly to, like, look, we don't want to talk about business. We just want to get to know you guys, like talk through, who you are, talked about family, like really wide ranging, conversations. And we just found we've got a very similar way of doing business, like they're, very open, very honest, very straightforward, and these are, this is just epitomizes really who we are. And we just found we had that rhythm with them very, very quickly. And we were just like, these guys feel like us, when you're starting to think about, can we work with these guys? We were like, well, they feel like us, so we can work with us. And so that, it made that decision, very, very, very easy. And, with so much appetite from pro rata point of view, from our existing shareholders, we were sort of oversubscribed anyway. So there was other investors that we actually, we couldn't get in on that round. But, it was a great result, and Dean and James are our amazing support. And yeah, it's been great to have them on board so far.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And, again, we've kind of spoken about this on the podcast a couple of times, and I think it would be really worthwhile kind of digging in with you on that, which is, if you're in the fortunate position that you have a lot of different term sheets on the table, or a lot of different options, and you're again in the fortunate position where you're oversubscribed and you can't add any more investors onto the cap table, what were some of the things that you did to help filter that you were getting the right people who had that sort of shared values with you?
Spending time with them, and that was difficult, like being remote. But I think the way that Dean and James, they actually initiated a lot of it, and just like having conversations and just hearing stories of just, like their younger days, and, do you play sport, or like, what are you into? And, talking about family, and, you get a really good sense of, how they operate, and that for us was really key. I don't, like, if your gut tells you like it's, if it feels right, it's generally because it is. I'm a big believer in that, how things feel, even when you can't quite put your finger on why. I think I've learned to trust that sort of instinct, because if it feels wrong, like there's something there, and I don't think I think people can maybe overanalyze things a little bit, like sort of, measuring people on either what they've done before, or, for us, we've really always focused on, if we're going to war, like if the chips are down, like are these guys are they gonna grab a shovel, or are they gonna wave goodbye? And we've always attracted people that are, they grab shovels, and they're like, we'll work shovel with you, we'll help you out, because like it's never smooth sailing. Like, you have your patches, where it is like glassy water and beautiful, but every business hits hard times, and I'm sure we've probably got others ahead of us, but we're definitely people that that workshop problems pretty hard and move fast, because if you're stagnant, you're not only just not developing, you're actually going backwards as everyone else blows past you. So yeah,
very true. Speaking of kind of moving fast and focusing on what's next, what is next for Qsic?
So apart from continuing to support the businesses and industries that we do in Australia, a heavy focus in the US. So we're currently rolling out like a 10,000 store network over there. which if that company was in Australia, it would, it'd be about 1,200 stores bigger than the whole industry.
Wow.
So the market for what we do in the US is just unbelievably huge. We're speaking to other customers that, combined would have about 30,000 locations spread all across America. And they're the kinds of businesses that really can, leverage our technology to really great effect, because they're really struggling with, the visibility piece, and like steering such a big company, but then also engaging with the millions of people that they have, like moving through their stores, every day, and offering them a very contextual and unique and targeted way of talking to them, they see the power in that. And that's, it's exciting, the US for us.
Very, very exciting. Matt, thank you so much for coming on, and very excited to follow Qsic's journey from here on. For anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Hi, get Qsic. Just hit us up through the website. It's one of the best, or just hit us up on LinkedIn. Pretty active on that. But look, humbled to be on, and thank you very much for having us.
No, not at all. Pleasure having you on. And like you said, I think we're going to have to make the requirement for guests bringing on lunch a new thing for the show as well. But mate, awesome chatting to you, and thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Rohit. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to episode 148 of the Startup Playbook podcast. As always, full show notes from this interview will be available at startupplaybook.co. I'll be back next week with another episode, but in the meantime, if you enjoyed this interview, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.